where does evil and suffering come from? In order to answer that question, you and I must go back to the very beginning. If it exists now, then it must have come into play at some point in time. And so we go all the way back to the beginning when God created the heaven and the earth. And we see in the 6 days of creation, as He creates the planets, the stars, the animals, on the sixth day He creates man. And He gives a summary here in Genesis 1:31 of creation at that point. It says, "And God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day." So up to this point, there is no sin, no evil, and no suffering. God's creation is perfect at this point. So where does evil and suffering come from then? Well, let me give you 3 points to think about. Number one is God created the possibility of evil. Notice I didn't say that God created evil, but God created the possibility of evil. Now, God created Adam and Eve, the first human beings. He places them there in this garden, and He gives them clear instructions. He says in chapter 2, verse 16, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thou shalt surely die." So think about this with me. God places them in this garden, and God gives them everything to enjoy, except for one tree. It's not as if God was some evil taskmaster and He says, "Look, you cannot have anything but this one tree." God said, "You can have it all. Enjoy, eat, have it, live it up, except do not touch this one tree. It is forbidden." And so at this point, is man holy or is man sinful? I would say to you that man is neither at this point. He is innocent. You see, man cannot be holy, nor can man be sinful without the exercise of his free will, which was going to be tested by God's law. It's going to be tested by this prohibition of this one tree. The consequences were very clear. It wasn't that it was muddy or gray or they didn't quite understand what would happen if they disobeyed or if they obeyed. The consequences were very clear. For obedience, it was physical immortality. For disobedience, it was physical death. Now, while God created the possibility of evil, secondly, man produced evil's potential. You see, God didn't create evil. He created a possibility within man's free will, but man's free will is what produced evil's potential. You see, the source of evil is not God, but it's man's freedom to choose or exercise his free will. God created us that way as human beings with a free will. You and I choose if we want to, what we want to eat, what clothes we want to put on, what we want to watch on TV. You and I choose if we want to love someone or not, if we want to obey the laws, put on our seatbelt or not. You and I choose that, but we understand there's consequences to that. And so Adam and Eve are placed in this garden, and they exercise their free will, and they do that, and in doing that, they disobey God's command. Verse number 6 says in chapter 3, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons." Something changed dramatically at this point. It says their eyes are open, they realize they're naked. So right here at this decision, something changed. And this is where the evil and suffering originated. This is where it all comes from as far as within our lives and in creation. So this sin of disobeying God's command here produced all the evil, all the suffering, and all the death that you and I experience. It moved from potential. Remember, God created the potential for evil. It moved from potential to actuality. Romans 5:12 is a commentary on this verse. It says this, "Wherefore is by one man," that's Adam, "one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned." So this verse says the one decision made back there in Genesis 3:6 at the very beginning produced all this evil, all this suffering that you and I experience in life. So where does evil and suffering come from? Well, thirdly, we need to understand that free will allows man to choose evil over God, with suffering being the result. Now, you may be tempted to say this, "Well, God could have created a world where there was no suffering, no evil in it. God should have created a world where there's no suffering. He's God, right?" He did. God did create a world where there was no suffering, no evil, and no sin. But humans messed it up. And you and I might be quick to point the finger at Adam and Eve and say, "Well, I can't believe they did." But you and I do it every single day. We must remember that creating a world where there is free will and no evil or no possibility of evil is a self-contradiction. You can't have it. You can't have the ability for man to choose and not have the potential for evil. You see, we're not robots. That's a gift of God that you and I have this free will and within ourselves. And so God created man with the free will to do this, to love him or hate him, to obey or disobey his law.